I hit it crummy yesterday. The ball was going to the right. How do I keep it from going to the right? I think the very best players understand the 2, 3, 4 things, whatever it is they need to do to play their best, and they keep doing that regardless of how they played yesterday or the week before.
This is The Tournament Code.
We appreciate you taking the time to join us, Tony. We know a little bit about your work, know about some of the players you've worked with, but before we start with your teaching, just tell us how you got into the game of golf.
I think I got into it probably similar to a huge chunk of the folks listening, through my dad and my grandfather. They started me when I was little. There's a picture of me somewhere like at 6 years old. I think I was at Disney World, putting. But, I started with my grandfather and my dad, and really my grandfather fostered huge love of the game for me. He retired at an early age at like 52 from working in the Pentagon and moved to Pinehurst. And so, from an early age, I would go spend, a big chunk of the summer staying with him and my grandmother. And he lived on this little 9-hole place there called Midland Farms. It's just a square, basically. The holes go all around the outside of it. And in fact, when I was in Pinehurst last year for U.S. Kids of all things, or something to that effect, or maybe it was the North-South Junior with the junior, and we went over and used that range because there was some weather or something. And so, I played a lot as a kid in Pinehurst, and it's been interesting as life is kind of full circle. And so the first major I ever taught in was at Pinehurst at the U.S. Open, and it was Smiley Kaufman and Sam Love and some other guy, Robbie Shelton. I think I had 3 guys in that year. So it was my first professional major to coach in. And then obviously Andy Ogletree having won the U.S. Amateur at Pinehurst. So, and then I've done a bunch of fun. I've been there a couple times with Golf Magazine and Trickshot and stuff like that. So Pinehurst has a special place in my heart, and it's where I learned to play. And all those summer afternoons with my grandfather is kind of what started the love of it. And, just love the game, probably like most people. It gave me time to spend with them. And, I enjoyed that, and I still do.
That is awesome. How did that getting into golf there lead to you becoming a coach?
I think like all of us, I got better. I was a decent junior player. I wasn't I wasn't anything crazy good. And I look now, though, you look back, and I wish, I knew all I knew about recruiting and development back when I was 14, 15, right? But, I'm 52. Junior golf was different then. You really played a lot local and maybe regionally, but not near as many people went and traveled and played all over the country. AJGA developed sometime in the middle in there, but not everybody traveled to do all that stuff. So, I remember playing, my family had moved to Birmingham, and I played in the Future Masters as a senior in high school. And that was a huge tournament. It's still a huge tournament, but it was a mammoth tournament back then because regionally, and there were some folks that played internationally. But, I was an above average player. I wanted to play college golf. Somewhere along the line there when I had some great club pros teach me along the way. There was a guy, Mike Landry, who was in Houston at the time, and he was one of the first club pros that really took an interest in me. And I'm still friends with him, oddly enough, on Facebook, and he teaches golf out west now. But he had a huge influence on me. I remember having my first girlfriend and him giving me crap about it in the pro shop, the way club pros would be. And I just liked that atmosphere. I liked being one of the guys. And, and then there was an older golf professional, Denton Scott in Birmingham, gave me a job when my family moved there. And he was very influential to me. He was so well respected. I just remember looking up to him as far as everybody looked up to him. And I remember thinking that was a cool thing as a 16, 17-year-old kid. And I think I was a junior in high school, and a new driving range, kind of state-of-the-art teaching facility for that time especially, opened in Birmingham. And a guy named Mark Wood was the director of instruction, and he'd been with the Golf Digest program. And I didn't know he was only 10 years older than me. I thought he had to be older and wiser. I tell this story all the time. My dad brought me to him, and, he made me a deal. He said that he would teach me as much as I wanted through that summer, as long as I made the money myself to pay him the $100 for the first lesson. And I mean, it was a great lesson, right? I had to go earn it. He was like, I don't want you to go ask your dad. I don't want you to go borrow from your grandparents. I want you to get off your butt and earn the money. And I did. And so, I hung out a bunch with him, and, I always tell him now, I mean, he's a great teacher. He's taught Bo Van Pelt most of his career, Dudley Hart, a bunch of tour players, married to Kathy Hartwood, married to, great teacher. And he was the motivation and the reason that I wanted to become a golf teacher. I mean, because I admired everything about him. He was a huge influence, looked up to him. And, from there, other coaches in other sports I always looked up to. I grew up a big Notre Dame fan, not popular in Alabama, but huge Notre Dame fan. And Lou Holtz, I mean, I would always watch anytime something would come on with Coach Holtz, I'd always watch it and listen to him. And then I went to a small school in San Antonio, St. Mary's University, and fortunate enough to play there. And some of my best friends in the world were my teammates. And Coach Meyer, who passed away last year, and Coach Zelznak, who became the head basketball coach after him, they became close friends. And I loved just going and sitting at basketball games at a small school, though, watching. They had won a national championship, at that time was NAIA. But I remember being next to the bench or right behind it and loving listening to the dialogue and how they yelled at players and smacked them on the ass and got on them and different things. And I always thought that was cool. I mean, and that motivated me, and that's what I wanted to do. And I knew I wasn't going to be a basketball coach. I mean, I was, 5'9.5", stretching it. But I knew I wasn't going to be in basketball, and golf was, what I was passionate about. And, my life led me to that eventually.
You mentioned earlier you work with Smiley Kaufman and Andy Ogletree, and I know we'll talk about later you work with, people that are on tour now like Lucas Glover. And I know a lot of coaches may not want to do the week-to-week grind on the PGA Tour like you're doing that. Is that something that you always wanted to do, or did you just kind of fall into that?
So first of all, I worked with Lucas for about 5 years, maybe a hair longer, up until a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we're still friends. I texted him after. I mean, his play that he's had the last few weeks has been unbelievable. He's one of the best people I've ever taught, one of the best people I've ever had the opportunity to coach and be around. And I had a great run with him, made a tour championship as his coach. But, I never set out to coach on the PGA Tour. There's teachers that do that now. I think that's what they want to do. And I think they probably are motivated more by money and fame than they are by really loving the game. I always thought, and I was always brought up, you should be wanting to teach the person in front of you. And if you do a good enough job and you get good at that, you'll have the opportunity to teach people as they get better. And I'm a big believer that I think the best coaches and the best teachers in the world, should develop young people from junior golf to competitive junior golf to college golf to playing professionally like you did, Cooper, like going to play mini tour stuff, and then get guys to the PGA Tour. So that's how I was brought up. I was brought up old school in the teaching business from Mark Wood, like I said, Wayne Flint, who's a great instructor and taught me for a good while, and then Hank Johnson, who passed, I guess, a year and a half ago, was, he was a top 50 teacher, Golf Digest top 50 teacher, ran the Digest schools, and, lived in Birmingham forever. And he was old school. I mean, they were hard as hell on me. The stuff that they made me do, I couldn't get away with my people now, but it was a heck of a learning curve and a heck of a learning experience. But they were so hard on me with Hank said something to me once, and at the time I thought it was probably an insult, but now I realize it was a compliment. But he said that the reason I had a chance to be really good was because I never thought I was any good, and that I was always trying to get better. At the time I thought, that's not very nice, but now I look back on it and it was a compliment. And, I've been fortunate to be on the tee with so many great people, and I still don't consider myself as good or equal to most any of them. I'm always just trying to get better and figure out how to help the person in front of me. And if that person turns out to be a tour player and all that, then I mean, it's great. But I just don't really ever want to just teach tour players. I've had the opportunity to do a bunch of that. And you know, I mean, the biggest thing I've learned in this business is that no matter how good you do, you're going to get fired, right? I mean, it's just part of the gig. And I've probably had a harder time with that than other people. And like, big part of my journey is figuring, you know, and I tell other coaches and teachers, it's like, you got to find out who you are, figure out what's important to you and what you like to do. And I've made mistakes along the way where I've chased places that would pay you a bunch of money and do different things, but like, man, that gets you away from who you are and what you do. And I don't ever want to get where I don't teach a 13-year-old that really would like to get good. And I don't want to ever get where, I mean, I don't teach a 65-year-old that just loves playing and is trying to hit it more solid and beat his buddies out of $50. I mean, I want to teach anybody that wants to get better. And obviously my teaching's evolved, and I use a team kind of concept, and that probably goes back to watching basketball, right? Like watching everybody have a role and a job. But, you know, so going back to your question, I mean, I didn't ever set out to be a tour teacher. And, you know, I think I'm just a teacher and a coach. You know, I think of myself more as a coach, and I've been fortunate to teach a bunch of guys that are real good, and we've had some good years and we've had some bad years, you know, but I think that's part of the deal.
Definitely. And I kind of want to add on. So in what ways would you say that you're still kind of an old school teacher, and in what ways specifically has your coaching philosophy evolved over time?
So I'd say I'm still old school in that, you know, I still draw plane lines, and I still like the club to lag, and I still teach a lot of grip and posture, a lot of rhythm and balance. I mean, I don't think that rhythm and balance and a good grip and good ball position ever goes out of style, you know? And, you know, I was fortunate, like I said, to be brought up under the people I was brought up under. And I would be one of those people that would say the basic information, like the basic things I'm trying to get a player to do, haven't changed dramatically a lot since I started or had a good foundation. Maybe the way I explain them, and maybe I've refined my understanding of them, and certainly we have more technology to explain stuff now. But, you know, I was early on, and I don't bore people with my story, but like, you know, when I started, I mean, I was living in this place and I was making like $200 a week starting out. I mean, I had my Ford Explorer repossessed, and I mean, I lived like, I had like 2-3 months or so I didn't have power in this place, you know, and I was trying to figure it out. When I got hired by Hank and Wayne, they were like, you know, hey, if you'll teach people to get set up. I'd watched Hank probably teach 5,000 lessons, and I'd watched Hank teach, you know, a fair amount. And they said to me, when they hired me from this place I was at, starving, they offered me a job. They said, if you'll teach everybody to get their grip on there, everybody to get postured correctly, and you'll teach them to make a pivot back and through and make a divot in the right spot, you'll teach $50,000. It's like, well, $50,000 when you don't have power turned on is a lot of damn money. And in, you know, in 2000, 2001 or whatever it was even, you know, so I was like, well, hell, I'll do that. I mean, you know, and so I did that, and I got criticized by a bunch of people. All he does is teach everybody the same thing, but it was great for me. It gave me a structure. It gave me a framework to operate within. I started seeing how some people got better, some people didn't. And then I started having to try to figure out, why did these people get better, but these people didn't, you know, and that kind of led me down the road of, you know, some of the stuff I've learned over the years from, you know, you going to where it's evolved, like doing stuff with Dr. Scott Lynn and biomechanics and using swing catalyst. I bought like the second swing catalyst in the United States. I mean, I didn't have any money, but I knew it could help me, saved up, and I had a radio show on PGA Tour radio at that time, so we traded a piece of it just to promote it. You know, but like I learned a ton from it. And so my teachings evolved as far as my understanding of why my basic stuff worked for some people but didn't for others. Mike Adams told me once that I needed to, you know, add more tools to my toolbox. So I've made a conscious effort to always try to do that. But then I say the biggest, you know, the second, I guess you would, biggest break in my teaching was I had the opportunity to, with Smiley, to do stuff with Colby Touye, who trains, Justin Thomas, Tommy Fleetwood, a huge chunk of the tour. He came over to my tee at that time. I was at the Country Club of Mobile, and we worked with Smiley, and it was just revolutionary seeing how he could train people to make different movements using fitness bands and helping people learn the movement pattern away from the ball, away from the club, and then jump in, and they were better at it. And I was like, well, that's different. And that's, we'd all been around fitness like TPI and stuff where you'd send somebody to a guy and they'd give them an eval and they'd tell them they were this, they were that, the other. But like really tying it in, being there during the lesson and making the program really specific to whatever movement I wanted was different. And so that would be where I've evolved to now, is we better at making people change their movement pattern.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you and Colby Wayne working together on Instagram, I've never really seen a TPI coach actually in the hitting bay telling players do this, and then they do it, and then the swing coach telling players do this and then do it. How did that kind of relationship come about?
With Smiley, Smiley, at the time Colby was in Baton Rouge. Smiley was finishing up at LSU, and Smiley really he bought into what Colby was doing, and then I started working with him. We started working together, and we had we had a lot of success. But I kept learning. I kept asking Colby, like I would ask him why I could send him a video of a player, like, why can't I get this guy to do this? Why, and his explanation of it from the physical standpoint was revolutionary to me, and it's helped me. He's been such a big help to me in my career. I could never repay that. But, that's kind of how it started with Smiley. And then it morphed into, he moved to Palm Beach or Jupiter, and he was like, man, you got to get down here. This is where all the best players in the world are. And it took me a while, but, I'm happy being down there most of the time. And so, a lot from there. Morgan Hale, who works with me here in Mobile, she's an unbelievable teacher and also fitness. She's trained under Colby for basically 8-9 years now with me and being around him. And then one of Colby's assistants, Aaron McConley, who's down there full time, does so much with me. So, because obviously with my schedule, Colby's schedule, you can't teach together every day, but like that having people that understand how we work and utilizing that aspect of it in the Bay has become part of how I operate most every day.
I think having that kind of group that you can send problems to and having experts in different areas, I can imagine is super beneficial, not only for you, but for your students. And so they get hands-on approach, plenty of attention, but also it's not necessarily sapping all of your attention, allowing each person to be put to their highest and best use. As part of what you mentioned there, you'd said, we worked on grip a lot when you had started. Are there any fundamentals regarding like posture, setup, grip, et cetera, that you like? Do you have preferences? Do you have rules? What does that look like for you in the golf swing?
I mean, I like to start with the ball in the same place every time. I think that if you start, I remember the first lesson I gave Lucas, similar to the same first lesson I've given a bunch of folks, tour players, whatever, was like, I would start with a rope down for the target line, the ball right next to it, and a stick, perpendicular to it, where you put the ball a club head width inside that heel. And I like to see where the ball goes from there. Hit some balls, film it from there, and then adjust and then work off of that. Right. But I think you need, I think with a player, you need a baseline. You need to have a starting point you start with, and then know what the ball does from there, and then work your way towards what the player needs to do. But I think, you watch a lot. I think ball position and, balanced posture is huge. I can't tell you how many times with a really good player, a lot of their problems are just the ball's out of spot and they're in a bad spot and they're out of balance, and they're trying to do something that even if they did it, they'd hit a worse shot because the ball's not in the right spot or they're not balanced. So, that's a huge focal point for me, and that's kind of where I always start.
And then when it comes to working with players to make that setup consistent, you'd mentioned that Lucas had the ball move around. I heard you on other podcasts talk about how It's easy on the range for the ball to move around. How do you get players just to practice keeping it consistent?
I don't think there's any, I always tell folks, like, I think that the best players in the world do the best job of taking care of those things that you can take care of, that you can control, right? And I always say, like, I use this example, like, I just remember one year, like, I was at a bunch of tour events and went to some big college events and then I was at a couple like Corn Fair events. And the thing that struck me was, like, at each level, I don't know that the guys that were the best players looked tremendously different, like as far as how they hit it, the speed, the way the ball came out. But what did strike me was, like, when they went to the range, how the best players had way more of a plan, probably spent way less time just there hitting balls, but, like, were very specific in what they worked on and did a much better job of monitoring the small details, like ball position and aim and so forth. And you could stretch that all the way to the club level golfer. The three of us could ride out to any golf course around you guys right now, sneak up in the trees and watch the people on the range, and 95% of them can't break 90, but they don't have anything down on the ground for aim or ball position. And there'll be one guy on the end that's probably the club champion, and he's got sticks down, right? I mean, it's that goes, that never changes, I don't think. So, that's, I think that, I don't know that there's any way to get better at it other than paying attention to it, unfortunately. I mean, I wish there was, because it would make all of our jobs way easier. But I think that one of the things that if you want to be really good, you have to decide is you have to say that that's important. And I'm going to monitor it. And I'm going to get better at that. And, I mean, a lot of players, there's a lot of players that don't. But there's a lot of players that don't do that I don't think ever reach their full potential because they don't understand the importance of monitoring their day-to-day stuff.
Exactly. So, obviously golf swing mechanics are important and fundamentals are important, but a golf swing doesn't win golf tournaments. Low scores win golf tournaments. And you've coached some of the best college players and amateurs in the world, like Andy Ogletree and Ben Carr. So you've taken two amateurs to the Masters. What would you attribute this level of success to for this level of player?
I would say the four best college players I've taught would be Bobby Wyatt, who I taught for the majority of his career, Robbie Shelton, who I taught up to a couple years ago, Andy and Ben. And I would say that their ability to, one, understand their golf swing and only listen to what they need to do and not have ears that listen to other things. And I think all of them at times have fallen victim to letting those outside thoughts come in and lead them astray, but most of the time they've come back. But all four of them were really good at understanding their strengths and were exceptional at understanding how to play golf, like how to navigate around a golf course. I would say that Andy Ogletree, even counting all the tour players I've been around, I mean, when he came out of college, he was one of the best I've ever seen at understanding how to dissect a golf course. I think Ben Carr is really good at that. Bobby was great at that. Robbie was great at that. So I think that like how they hit the golf ball, like I said earlier, wasn't dramatically different than a bunch of other folks we would have all seen, right? And if you look at each of them, they all have different golf swings. Andy his left arm gets more upright. It drops a little bit. Bobby was, his swing was long, rhythm was beautiful. He'd get it a little more in to out, hit a draw when he played his best. Ben's obviously can get real shut at times. Robbie would hit a fade. His left arm would get a little low at times. But they were all different, but all really good ball strikers. And so, I think ball striking's half the part. But the other part to becoming great is understanding how to play. And I think that, and then commitment to understanding what you need to do to hit your golf shot. I think a lot of folks are always worried about the last shot. They're always worried about, like, I hit it crummy yesterday. The ball was going to the right. How do I keep it from going to the right? I think the very best players understand the 2, 3, 4 things, whatever it is they need to do to play their best, and they keep doing that regardless of how they played yesterday or the week before. I think the best players are way better at big picture thinking. I think that's our challenge as coaches, though, to help them at times keep their eyes on the big picture versus evaluate everything about how they hit it today or yesterday.
When it comes to working with a player, you said one of the things that kind of can help measure coaches is, and one of the things you've enjoyed is working with players at every level and helping them get to each next level, because some coaches may get stuck with a player at a certain level or get stuck with players and not be able to help them. Is that, tell me, is that the case from your perspective that, sometimes a coach can help a player only get so far and then maybe the player needs someone else? And then secondly, tell us about some of the stories of you working with guys all the way through and what that's been like.
I think at times a player and a coach get to a point where the player probably doesn't want to hear that it's the same old thing, okay? And I think there's two sides to that. I think that as a coach, I'd like to think that the same thing will work. But I do think that at the highest level, there's probably a shelf life among some of the relationships, because I think that you're dealing with a lot of personalities, a lot of emotion, and you got all kinds of, you've got a lot of, more than ever, you've got more distractions than you've ever had. You've got agents, girlfriends, wives, mental coaches, fitness coaches. You got right, and so you're juggling lots of that. So I think that the odds that, that goes on forever probably are slim and none. And I also think it's human nature when you start playing bad enough that I think you got to blame somebody, right? And so that being said, I think that at a certain point, sometimes probably players always going to move on to hear something different if they hit, but especially for like tour players that you haven't raised since they were young, I think there's a little bit different. I think when you've brought somebody up from a young age, it's a little bit different. I think because they've really basically been brought up and only heard your terminology, the way you do things, and I think you're more into their DNA as a player and a person. So I think probably why that type of coaching interests me more, because I think long-term, there's less turnover, and I think you make a bigger impact on the person. So, that's kind of a tough question. I probably didn't answer it worth a damn either. But I think there's times that no matter how good a job you do, the message gets stale. But then I think when it comes to developing players, I think that I would tell you, though, that in most cases, that if a coach and a player have had a really good success and run together, they would most of the time be better off sticking together through it. But I don't know that on the professional level that happens as much as it used to. To go to the, stories like, heck, Bobby Wyatt was my first really, really good player. I'll tell you a funny story. Like they were looking for a coach and a teacher, and he called the office phone. His mom called the office phone and left a message for my mentor, Hank. And I got the message, and I was like, well, shit, I'm going to try to teach this guy. I knew he was good, right? I never told Hank about that. He'd have been mad. But anyway, so that's kind of how it started, and Bob just turned 30 this year. I'm 52. He was the first person, like I used to go to big amateur and junior tournaments with him a bunch. And, he was a huge break for me. He was great. He was the number one amateur, number one junior in the world. Still extremely close with him. Like I would say one of the closest people and one of the people that means the most to me because of how much we did together. And why, for me, the cool thing is watching him grow up. Now he works for Goldman Sachs and still plays mid-amateur golf, and he's there in Atlanta. And, so watching him grow up has been cool, and watching golf be such a central part of his life to now other things being a part of his life, but it's still seeing how he loves to compete. Robbie Shelton, two kids that grew up in Mobile, or Robbie grew up in Wilmer just outside of Mobile. I remember the first lesson I gave him, and I always said, like, his greatest quality to me was his ability you could give him one or two things to work on, and then, he never took tons of lessons. Bobby worked with you way more regularly, but Shelton would come back 4 or 5 weeks later, and you'd ask him what he's working on, and he would verbatim spit exactly back to you what you said the last lesson, and he'd been working on only that. And I think that's why he was so good as a young player. Yeah, I always admired that about him. We worked for a long, long time, and he you know, both. You always knew that they were going to at some point make the tour, and how long you stay out there and the success you have. I think there's a lot of other factors. And then, you know, Andy, when we started before college, and then when he went to Tech, I'd only see him 4 times a year. I mean, he was from up Union, Mississippi, just north of Meridian or outside of Meridian, and you know, I'd see him right before he'd go to school. I'd see him at fall break, and I'd see him twice over the winter before he'd go back. And then I wouldn't see him again until summer because Tech was playing such a busy schedule. Now, you know, as he went on and, you know, he kept getting better and better and had more needs, especially as you understand it, where his career is going to take him. I mean, obviously we found ways to work more and to see each other more. But, and then Ben, you know, Ben and I we've worked for 4 years. We took, you know, like Andy, we took 8-9 months off, and he went and did his own thing. I've gotten kind of more stubborn and meaner when they decide they want to get other opinions and stuff, and, you know, say some things that are hard on them. But, you know, Ben, you know, I think the thing with Ben is he coming from a small school like Georgia Southern, he had a huge amount of expectations put on him, you know, when he started playing really, really good in his junior year. And then I think part of the teaching process is helping them understand how to handle that and understand that dealing with that may mean sometimes you don't play well, but that's part of growing up, you know? And so, you know, obviously his success at the AM and Andy's success at the AM and helping them prepare for the Masters and stuff has been awesome. But, you know, each one of them was very different golf swings. I think that's something as a teacher, like I'm proud of, because and they're also 4 very, very different people. And my relationship with all of them has been, you know, very, very close. I mean, even not working with Robbie, I mean, you know, I still text occasionally, or if I see him, gives me a hug. I texted him and asked if he wanted to go tarpon fishing the other day because I was wanting to go down there. I mean, I think that relationship is special and important too.
Going back to Bobby Wyatt, when he became #1 in the world as a junior and an amateur, is this something that you saw coming, or did this kind of come as a surprise to you since, you know, he was the first player that you took to this level?
He was so good when I started teaching him. The only thing I could do was screw him up, right? Like I was trying to stay out of the way. You know, I'd say both him and Robbie, like I think everybody expected that to a certain extent, and I think they expected themselves to do that. I was so new to it at that time and learning, you know, with Bobby in particular. I was still more involved with Hank, and obviously, you know, I would bounce things off of him at times. And so I've always had great mentors behind me that they did a couple things. One would never let me screw anybody up. Hank or Wayne or Tom Ness, who was in Atlanta. I mean, all these great teachers, or Woody, would never let me screw one of those guys up. And I knew that, so there was some comfort in that. But 2, like, they always kept me in check too. If I started thinking these guys are good, how good am I? They would kick my ass and make sure I didn't get too full of myself. I think you expected that. I mean, I think anytime you start with somebody really talented and is driven, you expect to get wins and get to the top, but you have to temper that with the understanding that golf's really hard and you don't always get where you're trying to go. And I think the learning curve for me was understanding that doesn't necessarily mean you suck as a teacher, and doesn't mean you didn't do your job. That golf's really hard, and you can't equate your self-worth as a teacher or as a person to how your guys play every week. And I think that's a really hard lesson to learn for some people. I think if you care a lot and it's, you know, you're passionate about it, you know, I mean, I think it's hard to separate those two, but it's something I've tried to get better at.
As you know, we're called the Tournament Code, and that's because one of the things that we really care about is golf tournaments, because that's a great way and the best way to test where you are. As Cooper said earlier, golf swings don't win tournaments. When you're working with your players, how do you help them get better, A, at playing in tournaments and put up better scores, and B, how do you help them? What do you tell them to do on the course, et cetera, in their practice, try to make tournaments more like practice and practice more like tournaments?
One, I don't know that you really can simulate tournament play till tournament play, right? I mean, I think we do a better job of preparing them now, but there's the only one way to do it. And I know, like, doing a U.S. Mid-Am qualifier, I mean, that's like stuff like that. I watch the guys that work now and then go try to do that stuff, and I have as much or more respect for that than I do the guys that are out there playing every week, because you go from working a job, doing things, and then boom, 5 times a year you tee it up when it really matters. It's harder. Obviously technology and some of those things, like, I use the Bushnell Launch Pro. Obviously I do a bunch with them, and or like the quads and the TrackMan and all those things nowadays have ways that you can, create games to play and test yourself with yardage. And, I just think, I think the more you do that, the better you are. I like to encourage players to go practice more on the golf course, because I think we fall with all the technology and all the videos and social media and how there's so much info out there every day. I think people fall into this going to the range trying to fix something that maybe is not broken, right? And I think how do you get better prepared for tournament play? I think you play. And I think you play. I think you try to, play for something against somebody that's better as much as you can. I think one of the reasons I had we had some success with juniors getting a bunch better is, juniors were always around the Bobby Wyatts and the Robbie Sheltons hanging out at the Country Club of Mobile when I was teaching there. And so that brought up a bunch of other kids that played at other schools that are extremely successful. And then nowadays, I do these retreats. And so, like, I've got 2 or 3 kids coming in this weekend to work with me at Old Palm. And I've got 3 of my tour players going to be there working and hanging out. And I make them go practice and play with the kids, because I think they learn what it's like to be a tour player. They see how they work. I also think it's fantastic for the tour player to learn to give back, to learn to explain what they do, have to sit and actually think through and talk about what they do. So I think that there's benefits on both sides for that. And I think we should expect our people that are good and that we have relationships with to give back and to help the people coming up. I think in this generation, and not to sound old, but like with all of this immediate, instant gratification and all the stuff on the phone, I think people get away from helping the people that came up behind them. I learned from my grandfather, but there was, and the pros that I mentioned, but there was a great, what we would call mid-am player now at Pinehurst, who was a realtor when I was a kid. His name was Bob Klug, and he was like the Country Club of North Carolina club champion. I remember going out and playing with him and it being a huge deal. Like, and he really cared about helping me, I think if we could get more, it's probably wistful thinking, but I think, if we could get more in touch where those of us that have experience spent more time with those of us coming up, I think it would help both sides.
Absolutely. As far as your work with Bushnell, tell us a little bit about that, because I have a Launch Pro, love it. Cooper has one, just got one the other week, and we both really enjoyed being able to use that for various different ways to help us get better. Especially my practice time is limited with work and everything like that, and so is Cooper's, and so that's been a great tool for us.
Well, I've been involved with Bushnell for a number of years. My good friend and one of their reps, also been my longtime Strixon reps. I've been fortunate. I've had relationships with the same companies for long periods of time. I've never really jumped around. Look, anybody in golf knows that, for years, like the Bushnell, that was the rangefinder everybody would go get, right? And, so I got introduced to them, and they always would pick my brain on things, and I'd pick their brain. And then when they had this Launch Pro come out, they wanted to, figure out how to apply it to golfers at different levels. And so, we kind of helped each other with that. And then I had this idea for showing how I work as a team with Colby and Dr. Greg Carton and Mark Hackett and Dan Terleski at Old Palm and those folks, like how we would help as a group, different people. And I thought it'd be cool if not just tour players, but we showed what that was like for a regular golfer, an average golfer. And so we created this, content series, if you will, Pro Work, and we're in the middle of launching a bunch of those. And it's been fun. I mean, obviously, anytime somebody, is part of something, we're going to show the Launch Pro, but it's been very cool to me to partner with them and to show them and to show people like what it's like to go inside the ropes, behind the scenes, and all work together, as well as show how you can use the Launch Pro to help people. Because I think now that products like, before, whatever it was, 5, 6, 8 years ago, the number of people that could go get a really good launch monitor, wasn't very, because how many people do we know really can go spend $25,000 on something they're going to use on a range, right? To me, and when I'd have a person come see me who was just a recreational golfer and they pulled their TrackMan out, I'm like, this guy's a dork. Right? What's this guy wasting $25,000 to shoot 78 for, right? Get a life. But I was like, now when you can go spend $3,000 or whatever it is and have the opportunity to because going back to how you score better, we've touched on, the biggest thing is improving your wedge play. Knowing how far you carry things is so big. And so there's just, we're making it easier to do that. So, it's been fun with Bushnell doing the stuff that we've done, especially with Pro Work, and also showcasing some of our good young players, giving them an opportunity to get some exposure, along with just showing how we work, kind of do the same thing where if you're a 15 handicapper and you come down, we're going to bust your chops and go drink some cold beers and have a good time, but you're going to get better, and we're going to make you do some exercises with Colby that you may not like, but you're going to get better, right? Or Greg's going to show you how to practice and how to think and how to get more performance out of it. So it's been a fun project.
Something that I wanted to touch on previously that you went over is managing expectations. Something that, I've struggled with in my college playing days, and I know a lot of my fellow college players have felt the same ways. Just learning how to manage expectations can be very difficult. So how do you help players do that as a coach?
Well, I've done it better at times than others. So in every other part of my life, I'm horrific and shitty. You got to cut that out, I'm sure. But at having a plan and being organized, right? If you went and looked in my car right now, you'd be like, there's no way this guy could make a plan for anything, right? But when it comes to your golf swing and your golf game and your tournament play, I'm fortunate to be able to see big picture. And I think that, our job as coaches is to help you players understand the big picture and where you're going. And I think players generally see everything as day to day, how you played today, how you played yesterday. And I think the better you're in touch with the big picture, where you're going, the things you need to improve on, I think the better that helps you moving forward. As far as expectations go, I think that, understanding that helping people understand that just because you played poorly this week doesn't mean you'll play poorly this week. How many times as a player miss the cut and then the next week they've won or they finish third? It happens all the time. If you follow Twitter, you see that stuff all the time, right? Or how many times have you as a player had an absolutely horrible range session and then gone out and shot 4 under, right? That happens. And then the opposite's true. How many times have you striked it, not missed a shot, and shot 8 over, right? So understanding that understanding that just because you hit it bad doesn't mean you're going to play bad. Just because you hit it good doesn't mean you're going to play good. And then helping a player stay more in touch with the big picture of where they're going. And I think our job as coaches with tournament players is helping eliminate as many distractions as you can. I think distractions, hurt the player. So it's not always pleasant to say, hey, you know what? You've missed 2 cuts in a row. It's probably best if you don't fly across country, go see your girlfriend. But more importantly, we go do good range, get back to your range session, right? Or your wife or whatever. Doesn't matter, right? But I think that, sometimes I think you have to have difficult conversations with players. I think the more we keep the player focused on the big picture, where they're going, and less focused on the day-to-day ups and downs, I think the better chance we have at success. But then, I think with kids in particular and parents nowadays, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on parents of golfers nowadays. I mean, goodness, helping players understand that how they play shouldn't have any relationship to their worth or whether people care about them or love them or whatever, I think is a huge, huge deal. And that's outside of my pay scale. That's why I have folks like Dr. Carton with me, just understanding that, the biggest thing I've learned from him is that to explain to people that, like, just because you have certain feelings, whether you're scared of something, whether you're nervous, isn't wrong. And it's okay to have those thoughts and those feelings, right? Like, we got to help you learn how to deal with them and go. And I think people think that because they have these thoughts or these feelings, if you will, and these expectations get on them, that they think that makes them different than somebody else because those expectations weigh down on them and they feel like they're different. They feel like there's something wrong, that it's bothering them. Helping them understand that that's normal and that it's okay to have those, but that it's how you react to them and how you work with them and so forth that are what separates you from being a better player to, a winner or whatever level you're trying to get to. And I also think that helping a player understand that it's okay if you don't make it, right? Like, I mean, Cooper, you're talking about going back to the family business. I mean, those are hard decisions, but like supporting a player that wants to do that's a huge part of what you do, right? And if you're like me and you teach a lot of folks that come along through that, like, you're going to have more people come to that realization than you are that they're going to play the tour.
Success looks different for everybody. When you said for yourself, it's, as a golf coach, you can't define yourself by how your students are playing necessarily or anything like that. When it comes to your teaching, what does success look like for you, or how do you try to find that?
What, for me as a teacher or for players?
Yeah, you said I can't take how my students are playing and live and die in, say, hey, I'm a good golf coach or bad, or especially a lot of coaches will be like, man, my students are playing bad, I'm a terrible golf coach. What does success look like for you as far as working with your students, being happy with what you're doing, and knowing you've done a good job?
So success for me now is probably different than it was 10, 12 years ago. I think success for me now is, am I teaching the people, am I teaching people that want to get better, for one, right? Like, I'm fortunate I'm at the point, like, I don't really have to take on some guy just because he's going to pay you for the hour and you need to pay the car payment on Friday, right? Like, I've been there, like, man, I hope this guy shows or I'm not going to pay rent. So teaching people that want to get better, but like, I always look at it at the end of the year, like, I mean, do I feel like I've learned more this year? Am I in a better place to help people? That's really important to me. But I think the thing, I touched on it earlier, like, for a while I went through this phase where, like, man, like, I was flattered to be offered the opportunity to teach at a real nice place and put my name on it. It was a horrible decision and I didn't enjoy much of it, right? Like, it wasn't me. It didn't fit me. So finding the right place to be, surrounded by the right people that believe in what I do and believe in, like, I'm very passionate about helping other teachers and younger people but come up. And I think we need to do a better job and help people. So, like, if success to me is helping more people come up behind me and being in a great place that I enjoy being surrounded by other people that believe what I do and are passionate about, that is success. And, I'm at a point in my life where, I mean, you start realizing you can't do it forever and you want to do it with people that enjoy doing it. And heck, and also realizing that you got to spend more time for yourself. Like, I like to spend time in the Keys drinking beer and fishing, and try to make myself do more of that and spend more time with my daughter and my wife and son and stuff like that. Probably my biggest challenge is to be better at the personal side of things than it is on the professional side. And I'm trying to get better at that.
I can imagine when you got a lot of clients who want a lot of things from you and you want to do good by them, it can be tough to balance everything.
Hard to say no.
Yeah, I can imagine. That covers a lot of stuff today. We've gone over a lot of really good stuff as far as fundamentals in the golf swing that you think about, as far as how you use technology in teaching, and then also getting players better at tournaments. I think that's a perfect lead into our final question. It's the same question for everybody. And for you, it's going to be two parts. The first part is, if you go back to yourself as a junior golfer and tell yourself just one thing, what would that one thing be? And if you were going to tell a junior golfer one thing, what would that one thing be?
So I would probably tell myself as a junior golfer that I was better than I thought I was. I probably didn't realize, I didn't realize that I was decent, and I think I take way more, like I always say now, like I always bet on myself. Like I'm going to take a job or go to a place where I'm very confident in my ability to do my job and to earn a living and do all that. So like, I don't really like guarantees. I want to know that if I go kill it, I'm going to do better. Right. I always bet on myself. I wasn't like that as a junior golfer. I mean, I'd be the guy, I don't know that I wanted to be the number one player at the time. Right. Like, I mean, I don't know that I wanted all that pressure. I would tell myself back then that it's okay to bet on yourself, that it's okay. It's okay. I'd probably tell myself it's okay to fail. I think I was scared to fail. Now I realize that makes you better and that's part of the deal. I think I spent most of my career trying to prove that I was good enough, right? Or that I could live up to other people's expectations. Did I ever get to where Hank would have been proud of me as a teacher? Have I ever got to the point where Wayne or Woody are proud of what I've done? And so now I'm at a point where like I'm accepting of those things, and I say like I've been successful, done decent. And so I would tell myself it's okay to fail, not be afraid of that. And what I would tell a junior nowadays is that you never know when it's going to click, and you're gonna become as good as you can be, right? Whatever that is. And that, like, I mean, I've taught kids that at 16 were the best players in the world and aren't playing now. And then I've seen kids that at 16, we probably wouldn't have taken them to be the first player on our scramble team, and they're still out there grinding, and they got a shot to play for a living, right? That success and finding your place comes at different times for everybody in golf and in life, and you don't have to, and that it's okay if at 15, not every good school in the country is looking at you, because that's what I see so much today. Like, I see these kids, and they're like, oh my gosh, so-and-so's already committed to so. I mean, like, I'm never going to get a chance to play college. I'm like, trust me, you're going to get a chance, and then just because you go to Alabama technical, whatever, doesn't mean you couldn't play the tour. If you worked your ass off and you got good enough and you did the right things, I mean, you can do it, right? I've always, that the game of golf, that good golf trumps everything. And if you get good enough, they can't keep you off the PGA Tour. Well, they can if you played live, but they can't keep you off the PGA Tour or professional golf if you're good enough, right? You'll create a place for you. So just trying to keep getting better.
That is awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. Where can people find you on social media, reach out to you, see your YouTube series, all that stuff?
So that you can go to Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram at the Dewsweeper. And you can go to YouTube and just type in Dewsweepers Golf. There's a bunch there. Or if you go to YouTube and just type in Pro Work, it pulls up all the stuff we did with Bushnell. And those are the main ways. And you can go to just type in Dewsweepers Golf into your browser. Some stuff of me will pull up from somewhere, I'm sure. So, but look, you guys are doing great stuff. I've started following y'all. I saw you did some stuff with Ralph Bauer, and Ralph's a legend putting. And had the opportunity to do stuff with him, and just follow you guys. Great stuff. It's cool to watch you guys grow, and appreciate your interest in me, and look forward to hopefully running into y'all down the road.
We appreciate it. Be sure to give Tony a follow. And then if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe and leave us a rating. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. This helps more people learn about us, helps more people get better at tournament golf. And then if you're trying to find us on social media, you can find us on Instagram at The Tournament Code and on Twitter /X Tournament Code. As always, we appreciate you taking the time to join us and dive in deeper to what it takes to play elite tournament golf.